Hi, and thank you for joining us for Inspiring Honesty. I'm your host, Greg Brahe, and I'm an atheist. Did want to say thank you for bearing with us there. We had some technical difficulties at the beginning of the show, um, such as the case with live broadcasts. But I will be joined again today by, of course, the unconventional pastor, my fantastic co-host, Bob Graves. And today I wanted to talk about something a little bit more controversial than some of the things that we've done in the past. This is the 40th anniversary of Roe versus Wade, or today isn't, but it was this week. A significant and landmark case in the history of the United States Supreme Court that changed the landscape of of my generation, of our country in itself. Our legal system is entirely different, I think, today because of that law and the consequences, or that, not that law, that decision and the consequences of it. Um, I I had posted something on Facebook, a promotional piece for the show that explained, as a biologist, I absolutely cannot tolerate when people pretend that life begins at any time other than conception. That is absurd. The very definition of life precludes that from even being possible. However, that being said, um, that doesn't mean that that is a biblical argument, or that any biblical argument is a, a reasonable constitutional or allowable argument for why abortion should or should not be illegal. I will say that the Bible is not fully clear on killing and on death on that nature, but I have no doubts in my mind that, one, a fertilized egg or a zygote is a living human being, and two, it is still absolutely justified today for a woman to end its life. With that being said, I'll explain my case a little bit more, but before that, I wanted to say, Bob, welcome to the show. I'm walking into or giving you this one blind. You had almost no warning that was what we were going to be talking about today, and no chance to opt out. So, thank you.
No, I had no idea that was your topic. And I enjoy the conversations we have and their spontaneity. So I actually deliberately I come into this blindsided every time. But so and I kind of like conversations we have. I think that's a good topic for us to discuss. It's a topic where we probably will disagree, but I will not. Well, I don't know that we certainly wouldn't be 180 degrees opposite, but I'm certainly not in line with a lot of other theists in the way that they also argue this topic. And I actually, I don't know if you know who Randall Terry is, don't you?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah. Well, Randall Terry was a friend of mine. And in fact, he used to go to my church.
So you are very, very familiar with the arguments that he makes, and
Oh yeah,
now
yeah. In fact,
I have
when
to
he got
say, I
started,
think you and I,
he attended. He wasn't a member, but he attended my church from time to time, and was also looking for people to join him. And several people from my church did. Yeah.
you and I have talked in the past about the legality issues related to this, and I know you've mentioned that you think people go to an extreme on either end. This came up during the gun laws, or the gun regulation conversations that we have, that you believe there are people who take it to an extreme and things don't necessarily need to be codified into law. Uh, I'm wondering if this is a case. I don't have any idea what your position is on this. And before I go off on a somewhat egotistical tirade of my own, I'd like to ask: do you want to uh, take the pole position on this one, or do you want me to go and we can talk about what I have to say?
Well, just let me give you a little brief sense of where I'd be coming from on this. First of all, I do not believe that the Bible addresses this issue in any clear manner. There are people who talk about how, like when Jesus is in the womb and Mary visits Elizabeth, that John the Baptist is jumping for joy at the presence of Jesus. When I read that passage, I get the impression that it's just a cute little story of this interesting little coincidence that happened when the baby happened to kick, and it just that there's a neat little coincidence to it that is kind of neat to share. I don't think that that necessarily means that there's this conscious being, John the Baptist, who's aware of the presence of Jesus and thinking, actually having thought processes, and an awareness of the presence of this personality that, excuse me, that strikes me as a stretch for the text personally. But
Oh,
but there's also sections, where Moses deals with the law about how to deal with certain situations, and if two men were, in a fight or something, and a woman gets hit and she loses the baby, there was a certain amount of restitution that was required. Now, Moses is supposedly giving a law that comes from God. And so, if God is going to address this problem of the woman's baby being inappropriately aborted, and restitution is all that's dealt with, and we don't have this life for life, blood for blood concept that was also very strong for murder, then I just don't see this as a biblical case for a coherent idea that this zygote is somehow absolutely, in the eyes of God, totally everything that that is a human life. And also other sections of scripture where God says, when you were in the womb, I knew you. Um, that you know that doesn't mean that he knows them in the womb, but that at that point in time, he knows what's coming, and it hasn't come yet, but he knows this ahead of time. So I don't think that a clear argument can be made that the Bible somehow perceives this preborn life as
well,
being the equivalent of murder in taking it. But at the same time, I'm personally, opposed to the looseness with which abortion occurs, but for reasons that have something to do with other arguments, not the Bible. And also, I'm not. I don't really think it ought to be a matter of law. I don't think we want the courts involved in this. And if you want to turn it into a moral issue, then win the moral game on the floor of the culture and society, and win it there. And if you can't win it there, you can't win it.
well,
That's
in my promotion, I said that enacting religious or the religious lobby is not the answer to this, to reducing the amount of abortions that are out there. And what's interesting is that, as I said, I absolutely believe a woman's right to choose, or that it is absolutely morally justified for a woman to end the life of the child in her body, is not the same as me saying I think it's a good thing, or that we shouldn't do what we can to reduce maybe the situations that cause that urge or that decision. I think that it's a social issue as much as anything else. But
yeah. I don't know that I
you
call it a
don't.
moral right to do it, but it's certainly a decision that is hers. Uh, I think there are a lot of decisions people can make that are very unwise, selfish, decisions they will later regret, that they might even be very troubled with having made. But that still doesn't mean it's not their decision, And so I'm both pro-life and pro-choice. I don't like the idea of taking this choice away from the people to whom this decision belongs. And I do think that many people who own this decision are sometimes making it in a way that is unwise, and sometimes I think it's the stupidity of the controversy distracts us from thinking about it clearly. This is not an issue of whether or not because when you think you have this right to choose, you're going to turn this decision into a declaration of my right to choose instead of a decision that is based upon the circumstances and situations and says, to hell with all these other people who want to be interfering in my life. This is not their decision. Let me make this decision, and let me make this decision based upon the situation and the circumstances and the realities I can count on. That is not what they're doing. They're either making this decision because, well, it is a life and it is murder, a proposition they cannot compellingly argue. They might personally believe it, but they can't compellingly argue. Or another one where it's my right to choose. Hey, I can choose to walk off a cliff too, and I'm not going to enforce that right to choose by walking off a cliff. So I really think that the controversy distracts women from making an honest choice and decision in what to do here, and also to face other things that are going on. I see abortion as a convenience to be, it's a cousin to, I don't know. I think it devalues the potential of that human life.
And I
Even though
think
I
you hit
don't
the
think
nail
that
on the
as
head in saying
murder.
that it's a
You're breaking
decision.
up. I couldn't hear you. What was that?
I think you hit the nail on the head in saying that it is a decision, and it's not a small decision. It's a very, very significant, potentially life-changing decision. It's a choice, and it could be one of the more significant choices that a person ever makes. But it's absolutely true that that choice is not anybody's but the person in that situation. I mean, frankly, this is two men sitting down talking about the issue of abortion, something that neither of us can ever be personally, individually in the situation where we need to make the decision for ourselves. And I think that in and of itself is extremely arrogant in a way, but I'm going to make the
It,
argument that that's why I shouldn't be telling a woman that she can't do it. Um,
yeah. Well, the
but
zygote is somehow a product of both the man and the woman, and it's not that I wouldn't want to exempt the the man's point of view as having no relevance to the decision at all. But this isn't. But I would only argue that his right to have some input on this decision is a matter of well, I it's stronger than politeness. I mean, and by the way, you mentioned that you convinced that life begins at conception. I would even want to argue that life began a long, long time ago, and the zygote is merely a reorganization of that life. And
that's actually a
yeah,
very, I'm using that for the life of that particular organism
right,
that begins at that
right,
moment. But yes, I actually believe life on the planet
yeah,
Earth to be a single occurrence, at least life that survives today. It's possible that it arose a million times and only one lineage survived, but or one that we're aware of. But yes, life is a continuous process that started with the first living organism
right,
and,
yeah.
and carries on through this way. But
Which
for
is
this,
strange. Yeah,
it is. It's really. I mean, it's a single tree that branches. When we talk about the tree of life, that's a very appropriate understanding. Except for when you understand that bacteria have really tangled roots. But oh, the viewer comment. Somebody asked what a zygote is. A zygote is the technical term for a fertilized egg. The zygote is the single-celled organism that a human is. From there, it becomes a blastocyst and then an embryo before it's fully considered a fetus. So it's
right,
just the first stage of conception and development for a human. Um, and frankly, the most abortions that occur happen after the stage of zygote. So even bringing up zygotes is a little disingenuous. You're only a zygote for a matter of, I forget if it's days for after conception or even maybe hours. It's a very short period of time. The blastocyst happens pretty quickly thereafter.
yeah,
And even that, you generally don't know you're pregnant yet. So we're
right, yeah,
typically looking at an embryo or a fetus by the time it's actually even something we're aware of
yeah,
being the case. So, and that is significant when we talk about these questions because each one is a more developed stage of life. So, before we continue going, I guess on the absolute tangent, I wanted to make my case here and see what your thoughts are on it, Bob, and what the viewers are. So, my
sure,
argument is that a fetus. I'm going to go with the most advanced. A fetus is a human child, fully formed as far as digits, toes, visually, but dependent upon the life or the symbiotic relationship within the mother to be alive. Once a fetus has reached what they call the age of viability, which has been defined through a variety of different ways, but generally it's considered anywhere from week 28 of pregnancy to 34. At 28 weeks, it's not a very viable fetus. That's a full 2.5 months early. So we're talking about actually it's almost 3 months early. That's barely survivable preemie, but it has happened. Before that time, it is physically, at least today, physically impossible for a fetus before the age of viability to survive outside of the body of its mother for more than a few moments. And that's really where the question is significant. Almost every single abortion happens during that stage. During
Right.
this when the fetus is still absolutely dependent on its mother. And I would argue that is the only stage at which
Ooh,
it is a
you're
morally
breaking up, Greg,
justifiable
real
position.
bad. Joey, is he breaking up to you?
Am I, Joey?
Okay. Greg,
Yes.
you did break up for a moment there, but we are just bracing ourselves during this storm that we call your old broke down computer.
Computer's like 2 months old. It's ridiculous.
Oh,
I shouldn't be having this problem. I don't know what's going on.
Stop defending your computer. There's really no
I'm sorry.
excuse.
I'll give it a proper beating later. As long as it survives 2 days, it's legally or morally allowed according to the Bible. I think
Anyways, for now it seems to be hobbling along. Why don't you pray to science that it will last the rest of the show?
Okay.
All right.
I forget the proper stance for that. But anyway, okay.
yeah.
Hopefully this carries up for me because I think that this is a very important topic, and I've really refined this argument over some time, and I'd like to get viewers' input and your input, Bob. But my argument is that yes, a fetus is a human life. It is an individual, and even if we go so far as to call it a person, which I'll make a qualification on that later, but I would still say that it is absolutely justifiable, not necessarily right, but justifiable for the mother to end the life of that fetus. And that is because it is inside of her body and dependent upon her to live. The relationship that a fetus has, biologically speaking, with its mother is that of parasite and host. Most women are willing and happy participants in the relationship, but aside from that, if we are not going to allow a woman to have an abortion, what you're doing, legally speaking, or morally speaking, is you are forcing that woman to carry something inside of her body against her will. We have laws right now, and most people consider them to be justified morally as well, against even things such as trespassing on land. In the state of Texas, it's legal to shoot somebody in the back while they are fleeing from your property if they were a perceived threat. It's insane to that degree, but we have laws that people can protect their property with deadly force, and we look at these as moral. We also consider self-defense to be an absolutely moral position. If somebody is attacking you and you use the minimum force necessary to stop them from doing it, and that causes that person to die, you have still acted in a moral way. I'm not saying that a fetus is attacking a woman, but what I am saying is that if carrying a child to birth, a woman is not only facing hormonal, physical, structural changes to her body, but what is most likely the most traumatic and damaging experience at the end of it that her body will go through at any given point. She's going to go through severe pain, even if it's a C-section in the healing process. And to force a woman to do that against her will is morally reprehensible in my understanding of what ethics and morality means. So that's the argument that I make on why we cannot disallow abortion. The other side of it is that it is a question that goes beyond just can she kill a person, but is a fetus, does the fetus have the same right to be born as or to live as she has a right to live without this inside of her? And now we have a question that you have to consider the abilities and the situation of these organisms. When we consider what it is to be a person, there's more to it than simply having a beating heart and a physical body and potentially even the response or the ability to respond to stimuli. I personally, and even using the term personally means something, a personality. The terms are all related because to be a person is more than just to be a human body. You are more than an organism. You have thoughts, you have opinions, you have desires, you have memories. You are capable of feeling love and hatred and emotion. And these are things that we believe separate us from animals. I ate hamburger earlier today. That it was a living organism at one point as well. I ate it to keep me alive. And I don't have any moral qualms about that. I would have moral qualms about killing a person to eat because people have all of the qualities that make people people, and cows don't. So in that respect, once again, I'm qualifying a lot here, but a fetus is not a cow. A fetus is a potential person. It is a human, and it will, assuming all goes normal and what would be expected, will develop into a person. But at that point, its development, it is not yet a person. It has no personality. It has no understanding of the world around it. It can't think, reason, have desires. It is, for all intents and purposes, a what we would consider an adult in the same situation would be a vegetable. Sorry for using an insensitive term there, but this would be a persistent vegetative state, a la Terry Schiavo. And it's not wrong. Now, Terry Schiavo, there's an interesting case that's related to this, is that she was a person who was being fed through a tube, but otherwise was sustainable on her own. We talk about her as a person because she was a person before that. But at the point, she was effectively brain dead. In my opinion, that means she was a body that we were keeping alive with food. She was a human body. She used to be a person, but it seems strange to not call her a person anymore because her body still survives. But there's a difference at the end of a person's life and the beginning in that respect. And the question there was, should we stop feeding her? Should we end this life? And that was it. It was not complicated in that respect. The question there, or the question in this case, would be better described to the idea if Terry Schiavo had been physically connected to her husband's circulatory system and needed him to be there eating and living through his body so that she could survive. One specific person that she was absolutely physically dependent upon. Is it his call or yours whether he can end that relationship? That's the end of my moral argument. And before we get into the discussion from there, Bob, I did want to say we have a few viewer comments. One, love the topic being discussed. Great points being made. Thank you, viewer. Always love a little pat on the back. Two, here's a question. It says, wouldn't you agree that in most cases, the woman chose to carry this child in her body when she willingly had unprotected sex? And I also want to read the other comment so it doesn't get lost. It says, I believe there are exceptions in which the woman has a right to end the life of the person inside of her, but in most cases, the person is inside her because of a choice she made, and ethically speaking, I think she should take responsibility for that life, i.e. not murder it for at least 9 months, at least until someone else can take over. My comments I wanted to make on that is I have one child, and I've had sex more than once. It is not a absolute consequence of it, and there are ways to avoid it, and that's part of what needs to be discussed is the availability of birth control and things that we can actually do to reduce the amount of abortions, in reducing the amount of unwanted pregnancies, and that takes one, both reducing the amount of pregnancies that happen when they're not wanted, and two, reducing the situations that cause pregnancies to not be wanted. So between those two things, there are a lot of things we can do on a societal level. But I also disagree that just because she did this means that she needs to live with the consequences, and you get to tell her how that works. It's a very punitive understanding of it in that respect. And yes, she made a choice in most cases. I don't like to make any distinction between abortions that are caused or that are the result of rape or that are the result of consensual sex, because the question still comes down to, do you have the right to tell this woman that she can't end this symbiotic parasitic relationship with the organism inside of her? Now, the final qualification that needs to be made is, if it was possible, and this is potentially possible through stem cell research or something else, only through science are we going to get this one. So sorry to anybody who doesn't believe in science. The only way we're possibly ever going to get a situation where that relationship can be ended without ending the life of the fetus is through science. And when that happens, that'll be the point where I will say it becomes completely unjustifiable for a woman to have an abortion. But a woman can end her pregnancy. If it was possible to take a fetus outside of a woman's uterus and to raise it in a test tube or transplant it into a willing host, then yes, absolutely, it is no longer justifiable to end the life of that fetus. However, given that the minimum course of action to defend this woman, her body, her only true property, is to end the life of the organism inside of her, we have to grant that. We don't have the right to tell her no. Bob,
Well,
your thoughts?
let me say a few things. I really think that that this is something that I talk about multi-axialism, and I think that we need to look at this problem from many different angles and not just focus on one. I don't think that there's anything that you said that I would disagree with necessarily, but I would see it as a very incomplete picture. Um, Forcing someone to do something that they don't want to do is often done by law, but in various ways. And I think that there are different justifications for it. Whether or not this is one of them, I think, is yet to be argued. But I don't think that the fact that someone is being forced to do something against their will is automatically an argument for not allowing such a law. But that's just a legal argument. I still personally don't believe this ought to be an issue for the law. But also, the, uh, the question of rights. In some ways, we define life, we define a person, we define rights. These are all illusions. There's no such thing as a person. There's no such thing as a right. These are just concepts we find useful to organize our lives. And if we're trying to make an argument on the basis of reality, I think we have to somehow get beyond the linguistics here. And what I find is a couple of things is that the women that I know who have had abortions often feel guilty about those abortions, and not because of the things that the right wingers are saying, but because they find themselves not really knowing if that was the right thing to have done. They find themselves uncertain about what it was that happened. And there's a sense in which, I think I have a great deal of agnosticism in this. And I think that it is foolish for a person to make a light or frivolous decision when they can't tell just exactly what it is they're doing, particularly if they're pressured by such things as the scandal of being pregnant or the inconvenience of pregnancy. That allows us to spin our decision in a lot of ways simply to just justify a decision. We have any legal right to do so. And yet later, these women will suffer some genuine psychological and emotional difficulties as a result of it. I don't think this makes the decision something that I would call immoral or even necessarily wrong. But I don't think it is appropriate for women to be making this decision without being genuinely aware of the fact that this is what happens afterwards. Many of them are very they regret the decision, and there's things that, and I think that one needs to realize that we don't know the quality of life here, and I think that we can accept the fact that we don't know. So that means let's just get off this business as to whether or not you have a right to do it or it's murder. I don't know that we can just argue that till the cows come home, and I don't think we get anywhere. But let's look at the things we do know. We do know the way women feel about this after they've gone through it. Now, the reason I don't want it to be something legal is because I think like you mentioned, this concept of self-defense. There are some women who, medically, they're going through some situation where this is a threat to their life. I think that in a sense, it is identical to self-defense, except that the attack on their body isn't something that is maliciously intended. And I would hate to think that there's any woman caught in that situation who can't make this decisions because she's got to have somehow some committee or somebody else who doesn't even own the decision approving of this. So, and I realize that to allow it for such reasons like that, people are just going to make up reasons for doing it. Fine, let them do that. If they're going to make up lies as to why they're doing it and then later they regret it, they have only themselves to deal with in that. Not that I'm just willing to just walk away from it and think that's it, but I'm sorry, there's only so much that we can do to deal with that. And in the case of Terry Schiavo, I thought it was just terrible the way that everybody was getting involved in a decision that just wasn't really any of their business. And I think they put the Schivos through a tremendous amount and the truth is, all the distress we put them through, the major thrust of all that had to do with the people who were on one side of the issue or other side of the issue, worried about how the outcome of this was going to affect their issue. I say, when it came to Terry Schiavo, it is too damn bad how this affects your side of the issue. This is not your decision. And if Mr. Schiavo wanted to make that decision, how dare you get involved in this just because you're worried about how this is going to affect your argument? To me, that is just, that's insane. That's so abusive, so violating of the boundaries of other people. So,
well, and one thing that's significant on that one is I think that you're absolutely right, Bob, that we need to consider the personal effects that it's going to have when a woman makes this choice and the consequences of that. I mean, actions have consequences, choices have consequences, and they're significant. And this is not a decision to be taken lightly by any means. I think that the decision is to end a human life with intention. And I don't know any situation where somebody should not put the full weight of their morality behind that and to really consider this with all of the possible consequences. It's irresponsible to do anything less. But I have to say, again, going back to the Terry Schiavo case and why it's significant to focus on this and I think the only framework that's justifiable is the legalistic sense, because the choice is that of a woman's, and we could talk for days about the consequences, the potential consequences, the ways that can affect her, good or bad, and give anecdotal stories from people who have regretted their decisions, who have thought they were the best decisions they've ever made on either side of the coin. But the question is not whether that is a good decision or a bad decision, because I'll tell you, when we have a viewer comment here, it says, I've always been mostly against abortion, but over the years, I've come to see gray areas. I am mostly against abortion as well. I have an incredible 2-year-old son, Casey. He is the light of my life. I love him with every bit of my being. He makes me so incredibly happy, and I can't imagine how betrayed I would have felt, how hurt I would have felt, how much I would have mourned if my wife had decided to have an abortion after she was pregnant. And I know it would have ruined our relationship. It would have completely severed our ties, unless, of course, there was mitigating circumstances that made that. If it was her health was the question, it
would be regrettable and yet understandable.
Right. Yeah. Now, but if she had just decided that she didn't want a baby, she didn't want to be pregnant, then yeah, that would sever our relationship. That would be one I don't think I could recover from. But that still would be her right to do in a legalistic sense. And that's, I think, the only appropriate way to look at it. Because comparing it again to the Terry Schiavo case, the whole reason this became a question, and one of the reasons that it became more horrible than any other or any other case I can imagine, is because it was the law getting involved in saying, can you end this life in this way or not? And what ended up needing to be happen was not just ending her life, but ending it by starving her to death, removing her feeding tube. If the consequences to end her life anyway, should we not be doing it in the most humane way possible? We don't know if she has any way to sense things or anything else, but I wouldn't do that to a frog.
I'm not in the majority opinion on this, but I really think that when it came to Roe v. Wade, I think that when it came to the Terry Schiavo case, I think it was unconstitutional for the courts to even hear the case. That these were issues that people needed to decide among themselves, and the court just opened up a horrible door by even thinking that it was even the business of the court to decide one way or the other. And I remember when I was a teenager, I was going through some strange exhaustions. I was constantly passing out in school, and my parents took me to an endocrinologist who was convinced this was an endocrinological problem. And they take me to a psychiatrist, and he's convinced it's a psychiatric problem. And everybody who gets involved in this wants to believe this is an issue their particular specialty can deal with. And you bring a matter to the courts, and courts are going to want to, they're going to have a bias towards thinking, oh, this is a legal problem, and we need to come up with a legal solution. I'm sorry, I don't think you do. As far as I understand the Constitution, there's certain rights that belong to the people and to the states.
Well, the rights in the Constitution, or the rights in the Constitution, are still legal rights. The Constitution is a legal document.
Right.
And the question is whether or not the state has the legal authority, constitutionally speaking, to restrict what these people can do. And I think that's really what it boils down to. It's not what can you do, it's what can the government tell you can't do.
I believe this is a question that is for a woman, a medical doctor, and people well advised. I mean, let me give you one of the best arguments against abortion I can think of. There's this little blue Uba Juba that lives on the backside of Saturn, and it sends out mean-spirited signals to women who have abortions. And I think that we need to let these women know that this Uba Juba is going to send them just such terrible, mean-spirited. And for this reason and this reason alone, we really need to stop these abortions. Now, what do you think of my argument?
There's no way to prove it wrong.
Well, but it's crazy, and same thing is true of this. Now, let's just for a moment presume, just for the sake of argument, that some of these right-wing biblicists are correct, that this is, in God's eyes, a human life, and you are really committing the equivalent of murder. But you know what? You can't prove that. You can believe it, but you can't prove it. And the moment you've got something you can't prove and you believe, I think you have just discovered, here's where the boundary is. If I believe that I shouldn't, that abortion is wrong, I believe that my only options in that is that I should decide not to have one. And you know what?
That's perfect. You hit the nail right on the head, is that
but
if you believe it, you don't have it.
When it comes down to it, I have also told people, it bothers me that there are so many frivolous, what I would consider frivolous abortions. Now, I don't want to outlaw them. But
we only have about 5 minutes here, so I'm going to ask you to wrap up that point, because there's one viewer comment that I really want to get to here.
Okay,
well.
That I think it's important that we discuss the things we can nail down to the floor. How does this happen? How do people feel about it afterwards? What are the consequences they actually experience? Let's talk about this. Are you prepared for this? Do you really want to face this? What is it we don't know? And are you prepared to make a decision in light of what we don't know? If we can nail down the things that we do know and recognize the things that we don't know and make our decisions based on this, I really think many women would decide not to have one. And
I
one
want
last thing, and then I won't take any more time, is that
okay.
I also
There's the
have
viewer
personal
comments here.
experience in knowing. Go ahead.
The viewer comments here are that specifically, I want to find the first one that brought this up. We've had a lot of comments on this conversation, so thank you, viewers, for that. It is. I'm losing it here. I can't find it. It says, Greg, in your opinion, when do the rights of a fetus begin? And there's another comment that's a follow-up on that. It says, it's very interesting, the distinction you're making between legal and moral. Do you feel that legal should not represent moral? Also, do you feel that the law should only represent the mother's rights and not the rights of a living child inside of her as well? And that is one that I have to answer very directly, that the rights of a human child inside of its mother begin at the moment of conception, which is why if I were to find out that my wife was pregnant and I were to decide that she shouldn't be pregnant, and I were to actually, we had a case right in my town, Appleton, Wisconsin, here a few years ago, where there was a fellow who gave a abortion-inducing drug to his wife or girlfriend, I forget which, but through like a smoothie. He mixed it in and caused her to have an abortion. And they found that they learned that he had actually done this in the past. And he was convicted. Well, actually, he was never convicted. He skipped bail and I believe left the country. But he was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. He killed a human being. And we have another viewer comment here that says, you can't prove that ending a human life is equal to ending a human life. This is a question related to actually what I think you had mentioned, Bob. And no, the question is not, are you ending a human life? As I mentioned, we have plenty of exceptions for what is considered murder and what is considered justifiable homicide. Ending a human life is ending a human life. But the question is not whether that's what you're doing. The question is it morally or legally justifiable, and do we have the right to tell you that you can't? And in the situation of me deciding that my wife shouldn't be pregnant and the fetus inside of her, that is me exercising my will on two individuals that are the only two directly related in that situation. So it is not my call. Now, the question of the mother and the child, why it is her call and exclusively her call, is because, yes, the two of them are in a symbiotic relationship, but the child is dependent upon the mother, biologically and in every other way speaking. The mother is not dependent upon the child. If the child were to decide it didn't want to be in this relationship anymore, it can't. But say a child did decide it did not want to be born, the consequences of that would be it dying. The consequences of the mother making the exact same decision that she doesn't want that fetus to be born are it dying. So it's unfortunate that we don't have an alternate option. But
can I say something though, Greg? At this,
yes,
I didn't want to interrupt you too much, but I really don't think this is a philosophical issue. I don't think that any woman going through this is going to stop to think, well, let's see, the baby is dependent on me, and this is my body, and it's a symbiotic. I really think that that's all philosophical stuff, and it may help us justify a position, but I think that the woman has to make this decision and being fully aware of how it's going to affect her.
But
how it's going to
the philosophical argument behind it, Bob, is the legalistic argument. You're right. Again, this is a decision that she needs to weigh, and she's not going to make it based on, is this a morally justifiable position for me to even be considering? But the question is not, the question at hand, specifically in light of Roe v. Wade and 40-year anniversary, is that it's not what a woman should be considering in this situation, the things that she needs to weigh her options, because we all know that that is the case, and she needs to do that, and she's not going to be thinking on the philosophical side. It's the legalistic side is, do we have any justification to tell her she can't? Can we, morally, philosophically speaking, force our will on her?
I would hope I could persuade someone to think about it and not be frivolous in their decision, but I would not want to turn it into to a legal argument when dealing with such a person. I would, it's a sad thing that it happens, and I think in some ways it's disrespectful to the potential of human life. It's a way of it's an attack on ourselves in some ways, psychologically, symbolically, whatever. So I find myself, uh, I find the reality of abortion regrettable, but at the same time, I don't want to handle it the way we've been handling it. I think it fails, and I think we could lessen abortions by dealing with this issue in a completely different way. I wish
And
we
maybe
would.
that's what we should focus on next week is I
That'd be
agree
fine.
with you that we should reduce the amount of abortions that there are. So maybe next week we can revisit this subject and talk a bit on how we might do that. But for now, I have to say we are out of time. This is the end of the show. Thank you for joining us, and thank you, viewers, for interacting with us and giving us so many of your commentary. Please consider this. Find us or find me. I can't invite you to Bob, but find me on Facebook. Once again, I believe I'm the only Greg Brahe on there, and I'm happy to carry on these conversations in any other way. But join us again next week for Inspiring Honesty. This has been a treat. So Sundays at 6 o'clock, and stay tuned for The Unconventional Pastor with Bob Greaves.